Finally, after making the vehicles for Mario Kart DS, Wii, and 7, we finally circled back to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which if you're familiar with my channel, is a game that I've talked extensively about. Because of those videos, I won't keep my introduction too long, but to summarize, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, as of this video, is the ultimate Mario Kart game, as it has the most tracks, characters, and kart customization in the series history. 8 Deluxe also made several improvements from previous Mario Kart games, which includes improving the water and air mechanics from 7. 8 Deluxe also brought back bikes from Wii, but removed the ability to wheelie and nothing inside drift to make them more balanced. As for new features, 8 Deluxe's main gimmick is the addition of anti-gravity, which allows you to race on different angles of the track. And just like in 7, with air and water stats, 8 Deluxe also added anti-gravity stats for speed and handling. 8 Deluxe will also add a new class of vehicle, being ATVs, which like their real-life counterparts, are vehicles that have great off-road stats. Speaking of stats, 8 and 8 Deluxe each have different stats for their vehicles, but for this video, I'll just focus on 8 Deluxe's stats to keep things simple. Anyway, in total, there are 41 vehicles in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so this should be a fun and interesting list, due to the variety of vehicles, which makes for varying racing styles. So with that being said, let's go on to the rankings. To be honest, it was kinda hard to pick the first vehicle on this list, since I don't think any vehicle is necessarily bad in 8 Deluxe. But so I had to go first. I decided to choose the Steel Driver as the first vehicle on this list. The Steel Driver is a kart that is based on a submarine. In fact, the name Steel Driver is actually based on a submarine 3DS game titled Steel Diver. Anyway, I like the detail put into this vehicle, as when you drive underwater, the back propeller starts rotating, which imitates submarines in real life. I also think the cobalt blue and red color combination makes the Steel Driver stand out. Stat-wise, the Steel Driver is regarded as the worst vehicle in 8 Deluxe by several Mario Kart YouTubers. That's due to having a lot of negative stats that include air and anti-gravity speed, acceleration, most handling stats, and the most important stat in the game, Mini Turbo. But there are a few positives for the Steel Driver, as it does have very high underwater speed and handling stats, as well as a pretty decent rate stat. Actually, the Steel Driver is very similar to the Tiny Tug from Mario Kart 7, as they're both based on water vehicles and have very similar stats. However, I think the Tiny Tug is better than the Steel Driver, due to its design being more unique and standing out more, as well as not having as many below average stats as the Steel Driver. So while the Steel Driver does have a unique ideal and solid design, it does pale in comparison to other vehicles in the game. Plus with it having arguably the worst stats, the Steel Driver is just kind of a low tier vehicle that doesn't have that great of a design to make it memorable. The Gold Standard is a kart that I won't spend too much time on, since I already talked about it in my Mario Kart 7 video, and it kinda acts the same way here, since it's essentially a solid Gold Standard kart that is the last unlockable in the game. Stat-wise, compared to 7, the Gold Standard is actually worse than 8 Deluxe, as well as still has a high ground speed. Its acceleration, traction, and mini turbo are below average. Hell, it doesn't even have an above average rate stat like it did in 7. The full Gold Standard combo with the gold wheels and parachute is even worse, but to start out with some positives, it does receive generous bumps in its ground speed and rate stat. However, there are significant nerfs to the rest of its speed and handling stats, along with acceleration, traction, and mini turbo stats, which are just horrendous, to a point where I would say that it is one of the worst kart combos in the game. To be honest, I kinda gave the Gold Standard a pass in my 7 video, mostly due to the fact that I thought unlocking a gold kart after mastering the game was a cool idea. However, With the gold standard being a below average court, I kinda question why it exists. Like, I understand you don't want to make the gold standard too overpowered, but at least make it not completely suck. In conclusion, I still like the ideal of the gold standard, but I think it acts more as a trophy than a practical court. For our first bike on the list, we have the Vomit. The Vomit is essentially the bolt buggy and pipe frame turned into a bike, as they both have similar designs of being a frame of a vehicle, and the Vomit has similar tailpipes to the bolt buggy. To be honest, I actually think the Vomit is a major improvement from the bolt buggy, which is mostly due to the fact that the Vomit is a bike, so it doesn't look similar to the pipe frame like the bolt buggy did. Speaking of which, the Vomit is actually based on a rat bike, which explains the name Vomit. Stat-wise, the Vomit is fairly average, as it has above average stats for acceleration and most handling, but also has below average stats for most speeds and is a lightweight vehicle. However, with its high mini-turbo stat, it does make the Vomit a slightly above average vehicle.
Until I get a mini turbo. Suddenly, the slowest combo is actually catching up. And not just catching up, the slowest combo in the
which is why mini turbo is the most important stat in the game, and why it makes speed stats kinda useless. I do think that was a smart choice to make a bike inspired court for the pipe frame, since it's one of the more recognizable courts in the series, and bikes have become a staple in the series as well. So overall, the Vomit is a pretty solid vehicle, design and stat-wise. Anyway, speaking of a pipe frame, the pipe frame is the next vehicle on the list. I won't spend too much time talking about it, since I already did in my Mario Kart 7 video, but basically, the pipe frame was the first kart in the series, being the default kart in Super Mario Kart, Mario Kart 64, and Super Circuit. Stat-wise, compared to Mario Kart 7, I would say the pipe frame is slightly worse than 8 Deluxe, since the pipe frame will get some nerfs to its speed, especially underwater speed. However, the pipe frame would also get some buffs in acceleration, as well as most handling stats. Also, since it still has a high mini-turbo, the pipe frame stats are very similar to the Vomit, making the pipe frame slightly above average overall. Again, not much more to say, except that the pipe frame is easily one of, if not the most recognizable kart in the series, and will probably continue to be a staple in future Mario Kart games. As its name implies, Mr. Scooty is basically a small toy scooter. To be honest, I kinda think this bike is cute, as the blue, red, and yellow color combo, along with the bike's small design, reminds me of a toy that I would have had as a child. Stat-wise, Mr. Scooty has been described as a spiritual successor to the Cracker from Mario Kart Wii, since they both are light and have very low speed stats, but also have high acceleration, handling, and mini-turbo stats to balance things out. In fact, due to the vehicle's high acceleration and mini-turbo, it has been described as one of the top vehicles in 8 Deluxe, and is seen often in online play. Overall, my opinion on Mr. Scooty is very similar to my opinion on the Cracker, as they're both really beginner friendly, have a childish design, and are fun to race with. While I do like the Cracker better personally, Mr. Scooty's success balances things out. The Mach 8 is a kart that has a very interesting design, as it resembles a jet engine, along with a 1950s Formula 1 car, more specifically, the OSCA Turbo G 4500. I really like the tail fin of the Mach 8, as well as the aerodynamic look of the kart, as it makes it look sporty in my opinion. I also think that the yellow and blue color combo fits the kart really well. The Mach 8 also illuminates during anti-gravity sections, which I think is a really cool and unique feature. Speaking of anti-gravity, the Mach 8 has some of the best anti-gravity stats in the game, as it has above average anti-gravity speed and handling. However, outside of that, but Mark 8 doesn't have too much to offer outside of anti-gravity tracks. Which is a shame, since if you compare the Mark 8 stats between 8 and 8 Deluxe, the Mark 8 will lose most of its speed and handling stats, but it does have average traction and mini turbo, so it kinda balances out in the end. Overall, the Mark 8 is caught that has a nice sleek and aerodynamic design that performs well on anti-gravity sections, while illuminating as a bonus. The land ship is caught that has a really cool and unique design, as it's based on Bowser's airship in the Mario series. I really appreciate how much detail was put into this cart. From the giant mast with spikes covered around it, to the cannons on the side of the cart. Speaking of which, the cannons actually move back and forth as if they were firing, which I think is just an amazing and badass design detail. Stat-wise, the land ship has some of the strongest underwater stats in the game, as it has a very high underwater speed and handling. The land ship also has high acceleration, traction, and mini turbo stats, which is definitely a plus. However, outside of the water, the land ship struggles, as it is very light while also having low speed stats, but with the land ship's high stats underwater, plus its high mini turbo, it has become one of the best carts for underwater tracks, and can be seen on time trials. Overall, the land ship is a really cool cart, as it does a great job of representing the Mario series, as well as being one of the most carefully designed carts in the series. The Comet is the first inside drift bike on this list, which is technically referred to as hybrid drift by fans, due to just how different drift style feels compared to Mario Kart Wii. Design-wise, the Comet has a sporty look, as it's sleek and has a turbine on the front, similar to the Mark 8. I also like the orange color of the bike, as orange isn't really a common vehicle color in the series. The Comet is also based on a super bike, which I think is an interesting detail. Stat-wise, the Comet is actually fairly average, as it doesn't really have any stats that are too high nor too low. However, with the Comet having above average air stats, plus acceleration and mini turbo, it can be successful in competitive play. I think average is the best word to describe the Comet, as its design isn't too elaborate, and its stats are also pretty grounded as well. So overall, the Comet is just a very solid bike that gives off a sporty feel. I won't spend too much time talking about the standard kart, since I've already talked about it in my previous kart ranking videos. However, I did want to do a quick ranking on each of the 4 variants, to see which design is the best. In 4th place, we have the DS variant, and while it's not horrible by any means, it is definitely the roughest one compared to the others. In 3rd place, we have 7's variant, which is very similar to DS's design, but is more polished. Finally, in 2nd and 1st place, we have 8 Deluxes and Wii's designs respectively. While I do prefer Wii's design over 8 Deluxe, mostly due to having the most unique design from other standard karts, 8 Deluxes is still a really close 2nd place. 8 Deluxe's variant will essentially take 7's model, but make it a lot sleeker and give it a sporty look. I'm amazed at how the developers turned an average kart into something that is actually stylish and appealing. Again, not much to say, but it's awesome how the standard kart has changed over the years, and I can't wait to see what the future direction of this kart will be. The Tri-Speeder is a very interesting kart, as it's one of the few karts in the series to have 3 wheels, but there are also other features that make it unique, which includes the big V engine on the front, along with the question mark block, which I think are cool details. I also like the color of the kart being green, as well as its nostalgic design. In fact, the Tri-Speeder is actually based on the 1937 Morgan Super Sport. Stat-wise, the Tri-Speeder is very identical to the Still Diver, as they both have great underwater stats, as well as weight, but they're both low on other speed and handling stats, as well as having low acceleration and mini turbo stats. With me saying earlier that Steel Diver was considered one of the worst vehicles in the game, that would unfortunately be true for the Tri-Speeder as well. However, the Tri-Speeder is still one of the more unique karts in the series, due to its engine and having 3 wheels. The standard ATV is essentially what the standard kart and standard bike are to karts and bikes. It's a basic vehicle that is easy to use and helps you get introduced to the mechanics. In the standard ATV's instance, it looks like, well, an ATV, which in real life are known for being able to drive on rough terrain like forest, hills, and deserts. Speaking of which, the standard ATV stats backs this sentiment up, as it does have an above average traction stat, as well as pretty decent weight and ground speed as well. However, the rest of the standard ATV stats are either average or below average, including a low mini turbo stat, which is not very good. There are ATVs that do have good stats, as you'll see later on, and while the standard ATV is disappointing stat-wise, it still has a very solid and unique design, due to it being a new vehicle class in the series, making it pretty decent overall. I've talked about the B-Dasher previously in both my DS and 7 kart ranking videos, so I won't spend too much time talking about it here, since it hasn't really changed much from its DS counterpart design-wise. Stat-wise, however, 8 Deluxe's B-Dasher is probably the worst out of the 3 variants. While it does keep its high ground speed from 7, it does get major nerfs to its handling, traction, and mini turbo stats, which is not very good. The B-Dasher also gets a slight decrease in its acceleration stat, but on a positive note, it does get a little bump in its weight, and the rest of the B-Dasher's speed stats remain mostly unchanged. However, due to its very low acceleration and mini turbo stats, it's easily a below average kart in 8 Deluxe. Out of all the kart videos I've done, this is probably the worst the B-Dasher has performed, since in my previous videos, it was usually a top 10 vehicle. That's also not mentioning that the B-Dasher was considered a very competitive vehicle in both DS and 7. I think it kinda shows that the specialty of the B-Dasher is kind of dying, as well as 8 Deluxe just having a really good kart selection. But the B-Dasher is still a pretty good kart that has a lot of history in the series. I'll be interested to see how it held up potentially in the near future. The standard bike is a vehicle that I've previously talked about in my Wii video, and what I said there still applies here, as it basically acts as an introduction to bikes and is easy for beginners to master. However, I do like the design of 8 Deluxe's standard bike much better than Wii's, since it has a much sleeker and sporty design. It also resembles the bike from Excite Bike, which I think is a cool and awesome detail. Stat-wise, the standard bike is pretty average, if not slightly above average, as besides its ground speed, water speed, and weight, the rest of the standard bike stats are either average or above average. In fact, with the standard bike having above average stats in acceleration and mini turbo, it has become a surprisingly good vehicle in competitive play, and that's something I can't really say about any other standard vehicle in the series. Overall, 8 Deluxe's standard bike is easily the best standard vehicle in the series so far, as not only does it have the best design, but it's also the best competitively as well. I'll be curious to see if any other standard vehicle in future series can dethrone it. The sports bike is another hybrid drift bike. Design-wise, it has been described as a successor to the Wii's Mach bike, so they both have very similar designs, along with the windshield on the front. However, I would say the sports bike is more stylized than the Mach bike, as the sports bike has a lot of interesting decals on it, like a bullet bill, One Up Racing, Princess Orange, and many more. Also, my favorite variant of the sports bike would probably be orange, this reminds me of Daisy's Mark Bike. Stat-wise, the sports bike is very similar to Comet, as it doesn't have any stats too high or too low. However, with it having below average acceleration, weight, and mini-turbo stats, the Comet is a better bike comparatively, and the sports bike is a below average vehicle. Overall, the sports bike and the Mark bike are very similar to me on a personal ranking, as while one is better comparatively, the other is much more flashy design-wise. While I'll still say I like the Mark bike better due to nostalgia and its tinted window, the sports bike is very close behind, making it a pretty good vehicle overall. Not to be confused with the Sneakster from Mario Kart Wii, the Sneaker is basically what its name implies. It's a kart that is based on a sneaker. If you remember my rant on the Tyrant from my DS video, then you should already know how I feel about karts based on feet. However, I actually don't really have that much of a problem with the Sneaker. In fact, I actually think it's a pretty good vehicle, which is probably due to the multiple color styles it has, with my favorite of course being blue and red. I also like how the shoelaces actually turn to the tailpipes, which I think is a really cool detailed design. Stat-wise, the Sneaker is fairly average, as most of its stats are either average or slightly above or below average, with the only exception being acceleration and traction being low. That's of course not mentioning mini turbo being slightly below average as well. While the Sneaker does take a hit due to low acceleration and mini turbo stats, its above average ground speed does make up for it some. Usually, I would joke about a vehicle like the Sneaker, say that promotes athlete's foot and foot fungus. However, I actually think the Sneaker is a pretty good kart overall, due to its stylish and clever design, with having decent stats also being a bonus. The Prancer is easily one of the most unique vehicles in the series, as it's basically a carriage that is carried by two white horses. I really like the detail put into this kart, as the horses actually move up and down when driving, which I think is a really cool feature. That's of course not mentioned in the pumpkin carriage, which is obviously a reference to the classic story of Cinderella, which is another cool detail. Stat-wise, the Prancer is fairly average, as besides its low acceleration stat, the rest of the Prancer's stats are either average or slightly above or below average, with its strengths being ground speed and underwater handling. Overall, the Prancer is just a really unique vehicle in the series, due to its design that references Cinderella, as well as the horses moving up and down, as if trotting. This is easily one of the most unique and carefully designed karts in the series. The Duke is basically a large scooter, similar to the Shooting Star from Mario Kart Wii. While I do like the Shooting Star better overall, the Duke does have some features that make it stand out. I really like the design of the Duke, as its pointed front of the bike reminds me of a sleek and futuristic spacecraft. I also think that purple and yellow is a really cool and unique color combo as well. That's of course not mentioning that the Duke is one of the few vehicles in the game that illuminates in sync with the track music, which I think is just an amazing and awesome detailed design. Stat-wise, the Duke is the definition of average, as it has the same stats as the standard kart, meaning it doesn't have any stats that are positive or negative, which just makes it easier for players to customize to fit their racing style. While the Duke isn't as great as its Wii counterpart, it still has some really cool features, which includes its sleek and futuristic design, as well as its ability to illuminate and be easily customizable, making for a pretty good vehicle overall. The Streetle is the first vehicle on this list to be based on another Nintendo game outside of the Mario series. In the Streetle's instance, it's based on the beetles that can be commonly found in the Animal Crossing series. Design-wise, the Streetle mostly resembles a horn beetle, as it has a huge horn on the front and rings in the back. Speaking of rings, they actually open up when the vehicle gets a speed boost, gliding, or in an anti-gravity section, which I think is a really cool detail. I also like the color combo of Bestreetle, as orange, brown, and green are common colors in nature, and just fits the Animal Crossing series extremely well. Stat-wise, Bestreetle is a slow and light vehicle, as it has a low weight stat, as well as low speed stats, with an exception to underwater speed. However, Bestreetle also has some pretty good handling stats, as well as high acceleration, traction, and mini-turbo stats, making Bestreetle an above average kart overall, especially in underwater tracks. In conclusion, Bestreetle is just a great idea for an Animal Crossing vehicle. Not only is the design really cool and unique, but also has some pretty good stats that makes it fun to race with, making for a pretty good kart overall. Okay, I should probably go into more detail first before I talk about this vehicle. So in 2014, Nintendo went into a partnership with Mercedes-Benz, in the goal of advertising for the new GLA, as well as helping the Wii U from its sluggish sales. For Nintendo's benefit, Mercedes would make many weird commercials in Japan, highlighting Wii U games like Super Mario Maker and Mario Kart 8, as it showed Mario and various other characters driving the GLA. For Mercedes' benefit, Nintendo would add a GLA skin in Super Mario Maker, as well as 3 Mercedes-Benz vehicles in Mario Kart 8. As you could probably guess, the W25 Silver Arrow is one of those vehicles, being based on the 1930s race car made by Mercedes-Benz. Usually, I would lump the Silver Arrow in the same OK category as the classic Dragster and Cucumber, since they do look very similar to each other. However, I also like the Silver Arrow better, due to its more classic design and silver shine. Stat-wise, the Silver Arrow is fairly average, since it doesn't really have any stats that are too high nor too low. However, it does have a high traction stat, plus with its above average acceleration and mini-turbo stats, it can be described as slightly above average. Overall, the Silver Arrow is a very solid vehicle, as it has a really nostalgic and classy design, as well as some pretty solid stats, with both those traits making it an attractive pick for some players. The Master Cycle is another vehicle based outside the Mario series, as it's based on the Legend of Zelda series. I really like the horse design of the bike, as it's a really unique vehicle design that makes sense for the Zelda series. Speaking of designs, the Master Cycle is named after and based off of the Master Sword of the series. The Hylian shield can also be seen on the sides of the bike as well. I just think it does a great job of representing the Zelda series. Stat-wise, I wouldn't describe the Master Cycle as bad, but it's definitely below average, as its only positive stat is ground speed. However, most of its other stats are either average or slightly below average, with the exception being its low acceleration and traction stats. Since acceleration and traction are 2 of the more important stats in the game, the Master Cycle's viability does take a hit, but not enough to call it bad by any means. I also want to mention that the Master Cycle is a hybrid drift bike, so that may also affect if you want to choose it or not. While the Master Cycle might lack the stats to make it viable competitively, it more than makes up for it with its really cool design that does an amazing job of representing the Legend of Zelda series. As you could probably guess by its name, the Teddy Buggy is an ATV that's based on a teddy bear. I really found the design cute and unique in my opinion, as the buggy's plastic eye-like headlights, as well as its stitches, are just adorable. Stat-wise, the Teddy Buggy is easily the most dominant vehicle in the game, as besides its slightly low ground and underwater speed, the Teddy Buggy doesn't have any below average stats, as they're either average or slightly above average. In fact, with its above average acceleration and mini-turbo stats, the Teddy Buggy can be commonly seen competitively, usually being paired with Yoshi and roller tires to offset some speed loss, as well as drastically increasing mini-turbo and acceleration, making for just a dominating kart. Overall, the Teddy Buggy is not only a cute and uniquely designed kart, but it's also just a very dominant vehicle, the likes of which hasn't been seen since the Flame Runner in Mario Kart Wii, and like the Flame Runner, it will be remembered for many years due to its dominance. The Wild Wriggler is very similar to the Teddy Buggy, as they're both ATVs that are based on animals, with the Wild Wriggler being an obvious reference to Wrigglers in the Mario series. Due to its more direct reference to the Mario series, the Wild Wriggler slightly outranks the Teddy Buggy for me, thus of course not mentioning just how cool it would be to ride on the back of a giant Wriggler. Speaking of which, there's a very weird and funny combination of Wriggler on the Wild Wriggler that has kind of become a meme in and of itself. Like, do I have to explain why this looks ridiculous? Stat-wise, the Wild Wriggler is actually very similar to the Teddy Buggy, with the only major difference being the Wild Wriggler's higher traction stat and slightly lower weight stat. In fact, the Wild Wriggler actually used to be the best combo in 8 Deluxe, usually being paired with Waluigi and the roller tires. However, due to the nerfs on Waluigi and the Wild Wriggler during the booster course pass, the Teddy Buggy and Yoshi took their place. Which really sucks for Waluigi and his fans, since this isn't the only time he's been shafted. So while the Wild Wriggler isn't as good as the Teddy Buggy comparatively, it still has a really cool design that fits into the Mario series. Plus it is still pretty good in its own right, making for a very solid vehicle overall. As its name implies, the Tanuki Kart is a vehicle based on the Tanuki skin in the Mario series. I really like the black and orange color combo on this vehicle, as not only does it complement Tanuki Mario really well, but it's just a solid color choice in general. Anyway, speaking of design, I also like the more boxy and safari-like look of this kart, which includes the tire on the back, as it reminds me of the Wildlife and Off-Roader from Mario Kart DS and Wii respectively. In fact, the Tanuki Kart is actually based on the Jeep Wrangler JK, which is an interesting detail. Stat-wise, the Tanuki Kart is fairly average, as most of its stats are either average or above average, with the strength of the Tanuki Kart being an extremely high traction stat, as well as having above average weight and solid underwater stats. However, the Tanuki Kart also has a low acceleration stat, along with slightly low mini-turbo and ground speed stats, and since acceleration and mini-turbo are two really important stats in 8 Deluxe, it kinda makes the Tanuki Kart slightly below average. Overall, the Tanuki Kart reminds me of the safari-like vehicles from previous Mario Kart games. However, I would probably rank the Tanuki Kart over the other two, due to its more unique theme connected to the main series. The Bitty Buggy is a kart that is based on the Bitty Bud enemies from the Mario series. To be more specific, they actually prepare Bitty Bud variants, as the kart has wings and the wings flap up and down, as if the kart is flying, which I think is a cool detail. Actually, the Bitty Buggy is very similar to the Cheap Charger from Mario Kart Wii, as they're both small, have different color variations, have flapping wings, and are based on Mario enemies. Stat-wise, the Bitty Buggy is essentially the kart version of Mr. Scooty, since it also has low speed and weight stats. However, that's more than made up for by its above average handling, acceleration, and mini-turbo stats, with both acceleration and mini-turbo being really high. As you could have probably guessed, the Bitty Buggy is a very successful kart in time trials and competitive due to its stats. It is one of the 3 most commonly seen vehicles in the game, along with the Teddy Buggy and Mr. Scooty. While I will say I like the Cheap Charger better, due to having more color variations and just having a more dumpy design, the Bitty Buggy still has nice design that reminds me of a ladybug, and having great stats is also a major plus. As the name suggests, the Yoshi bike is a bike that is designed after Yoshi. Usually, I'm not a fan of just plastering a character's face on a vehicle, especially a playable and iconic character like Yoshi. However, there are a few things that makes this design work. For one, out of all the characters you can base a vehicle off of, Yoshi is the easiest and most appropriate choice to make, since he has been used as a rideable character in several Mario games, so making a rideable bike based on that fact isn't too out there. The Yoshi bike is also extremely detailed as well, as the windshield of the bike is supposed to be Yoshi's eyes, and the red seat is supposed to represent Yoshi's saddle. The wheel spindles also designed off of Yoshi's eggs, which is just very cool. That's of course not mentioning that the bike also has extendable arms whenever you are drifting or gliding, which is actually something I didn't notice until I started researching for this video. It's just amazing how much detail was put into this bike. Stat-wise, the Yoshi bike is easily the best hybrid drift bike in the game, as besides slightly low ground and underwater speed, the rest of its stats are either average or slightly above average, making the Yoshi bike a pretty solid vehicle comparatively. Overall, the Yoshi bike does a lot to set itself apart from other vehicles that are based on characters, from being extremely detailed to also having some fun stats and features, making it a pretty good vehicle. The Blue Falcon is a kart that I've previously talked about in my Mario Kart Wii video. However, the Blue Falcon variants from Wii and 8 Deluxe are very different from each other. For one, Wii's Blue Falcon design is much more rigid and resembles an airplane, whereas 8 Deluxe's design is a lot smoother and even has a really nice green tinted windshield. Which makes sense due to Wii's design coming from F-Zero X and GX, whereas 8 Deluxe's design is based on the original F-Zero game. 8 Deluxe's Blue Falcon is also a better and more accurate depiction of the vehicle, as it constantly produces flames that change color during a mini-turbo, while Wii's Blue Falcon just constantly produces smoke. Due to those features, as well as 8 Deluxe also having two F-Zero inspired tracks, 8 Deluxe's Blue Falcon is better than Wii's in just about every way. Stat-wise, compared to Wii's Blue Falcon, 8 Deluxe's is very similar, as while it doesn't have as high of a speed stat as Wii's, it does get a slight improvement in handling and mini-turbo stats, but still, just like in Wii, Blue Falcon isn't that good, unless you're on an anti-gravity track. Overall, 8 Deluxe's Blue Falcon made major improvements to an already good vehicle, from its more flashy and sleeker design to its more accurate depiction of the Blue Falcon, and I applaud the developers for making changes and showing respect to the F-Zero series. The 300SL Roadster is the second vehicle on this list that is from the Mercedes-Benz promotion. It's based on their vehicle from the 1950s. It has the same silver shine as the Silver Arrow. However, the Roadster has a more modern car design, as well as a red leather seat, which I think just looks really classy in my opinion. Stat-wise, the Roadster has the same stats as the Duke and the Standard Kart, meaning it has no positive or negative stats, which just opens up a possibility for multiple customization options. And for a vehicle as classy as the Roadster, that is a great thing. Not much more to say, just a really nostalgic and classy vehicle that can't have many customization options to only enhance its looks. Not to be confused with the Flame Flyer or Flame Runner from Mario Kart Wii, the Flame Rider is basically a bike that has a fire decal on it, which I find really cool and stylish. In fact, the Flame Rider is actually designed off a 1970s chopper, and has a similar look to the Wario bike from Mario Kart Wii, which is another interesting fact. Stat-wise, the Flame Rider is fairly average, as it has slightly low speed and rate stats. However, it also has solid handling, acceleration, and mini-turbo stats, along with a high traction stat as well, making the Flame Rider pretty decent overall. Again, not much more to say, just a really solid bike that looks cool, and also has some pretty decent stats to make it a pretty solid choice for players. The Ink Striker is a very interesting vehicle, not only in the game, but the series as a whole, as it's actually based on the Splatoon series. To be more specific, It's based on the Ink Striker rep in the game, which is pretty cool. The first thing you'll probably notice when look at the Ink Striker is that it doesn't really look like any other kart from the Mario Kart series, as the vehicle is extremely long and narrow. There's a reason for that, as the Ink Strike acts as a missile in the game, which makes sense when you look at the cute but also terrifying smile on the front of the vehicle, as well as the booster in the back. Speaking of which, the Ink Striker is one of only 2 vehicles in the series that actually shoots out ink whenever you get a boost, instead of a typical fire, which makes sense considering ink is an essential part of Splatoon. The color of ink can also change as well, but that's only if you choose the appropriate color inkling to use on the vehicle. For any other character, the ink will be purple. Stat-wise, the Ink Striker is fairly average, as it only has slightly low stats in acceleration and ground and air handling. The Ink Striker's strength is easily in anti-gravity sections, as it has above average anti-gravity speed and handling stats. In conclusion, the Ink Striker is easily one of the most unique karts in the series, as not only does it have a really unique shape, but also is one of the few vehicles that shoots out ink, which are features that will easily make it memorable for years to come. The Koopa Clown is a kart that I've recently talked about in my last video, so I won't spend too much time on it. Design-wise, I probably prefer 8 Deluxe's variant over 7's. Mostly due to 8 Deluxe's looking more like the classic Koopa Clown car, whereas 7's has an exhaust pipe in its mouth, which makes it look like it's smoking a Cuban cigar. 8 Deluxe also has more color combinations, representing each of the 7 Koopalings, which I think is a very cool addition. Stat-wise, compared to 7, both Koopa Clown variants are similar, however there are a few differences, with the 8 Deluxe variant getting a slight decrease in its acceleration stat, but also buffs to its weight and handling stats. But the most noteworthy difference will be its drastic change for its traction and mini-turbo stats, as 8 Deluxe's Koopa Clown will get major increase in its traction, but also a major nerf to its mini-turbo, going from extremely high to slightly below average, which does change its racing style from a quick and stable kart in 7 to a more off-road heavy vehicle in 8 Deluxe. But still, the Koopa Clown is a very good kart in the series. If I had to make a bet, I say it'll still keep making an impact in future games. The Splat Buggy is the second and last Splatoon-based vehicle on this list. It looks very similar to the standard ATV, but has more of a Splatoon flair to it, with Splatoon-based decal plastered all over the vehicle, plus the large ink cartridge in the back. Speaking of which, the Splat Buggy is the second vehicle in the series to shoot out ink as exhaust, and just like the Ink Striker, the Splat Buggy also has different colors of ink, and even color combination depending on the inkling you choose, with the default being magenta. Stat-wise, I would say the Splat Buggy is slightly below average, due to having low acceleration and mini-turbo stats, as well as being light, but also has okay speed and average handling stats, so it's not horrible by any means. Overall, the Splat Buggy is another really interesting vehicle that has several unique color combinations and features that makes it stand out and be a great representation for the Splatoon series. We are now in the top 10, as to start it off we have the Jet Bike, which is also the last hybrid drift bike on this list. I really like the design of this bike, as it's sleek and sort of resembles a rocket ship. In fact, the Jet Bike is actually based on a fighter jet, which makes sense if you look at the rings and exhaust on the back. Anyway, I just think it's a really cool concept to base a vehicle on. Stat-wise however, the Jet Bike is not very good, as its only positive stats are ground speed and underwater handling. And while most of its other stats are either average or slightly below average, it does have a low acceleration stat and not great mini-turbo stat, bringing down the Jet Bike. While the Jet Bike might not be that great competitively, it still has a really cool and unique design in the series, which is why I think it belongs in the top 10. The Master Cycle Zero is basically a variant of the Master Cycle. However, the Master Cycle Zero has a more futuristic look from the original Master Cycle, and is also an outside drifting bike. The Master Cycle Zero is also an actual vehicle in the Legend of Zelda series, appearing in the highly acclaimed Breath of the Wild, which I think is just an amazing detail and an awesome inclusion to represent that game. Stat-wise, the Master Cycle Zero has the same stats as the Tanuki Court, meaning it has good traction, weight, and handling stats, but also has a low acceleration stat and slightly low ground speed and mini-turbo stats, making the Master Cycle Zero slightly below average. Overall, the Master Cycle Zero is just a really cool vehicle that has a really futuristic design and comes from a highly acclaimed game. Again, just another great representation of the Legend of Zelda series. The City Tripper is the last bike on this list, and for good reason, since it's easily one of the most stylish vehicles in the game. Being the signature vehicle for Isabella and Female Villager, the default City Tripper is white and green, and has a lot of Animal Crossing decals on it. However, there are several other really good color schemes, with my favorite being yellow, camo, and black in particular. Hell, even the brown somehow looks stylish. Speaking of which, the City Tripper is actually based on a Vespa. It looks very similar to the Sugar Scoot from Mario Kart Wii, which I think is a really cool detail. Stat-wise, the City Tripper has low speed and weight stats. However, it also has pretty good acceleration, handling, traction, and mini-turbo stats, making it a pretty decent vehicle overall, and one that's fun to play with competitively due to its style. Compared to the Sugar Scoot from Mario Kart Wii, the City Tripper is better in just about every way, from being more stylish and having many great designs, to being very solid competitively. Overall, the City Tripper is very good and somewhat underrated in my opinion. The GLA is the vehicle that started the Mercedes-Benz and Nintendo partnership, so it's very fitting that it's also the last Mercedes vehicle on this list. The GLA is essentially a modern day luxury SUV. Unlike the previous two Mercedes vehicles, the GLA actually has multiple color combinations besides the typical silver, with my favorites easily being blue and red. Stat-wise, the GLA is probably one of the worst vehicles in the game. While it does have pretty good ground speed, weight, and traction stats, the rest of the GLA speed stats aren't that great. That's not even including its handling, acceleration, and mini-turbo stats, which are just horrendously awful, and easily makes the GLA unviable competitively. While the GLA might be disappointing stat-wise, it still has a really unique design in the series, plus some really solid color combos as well, making the GLA, as well as the rest of the Mercedes-Benz vehicles, an interesting chapter in the Mario Kart series. The Bandwagon is another muscle car that we've seen in previous Mario Kart games, from the Brute and DS to the Flameflyer and Wii. However, there are a few features that I think makes the Bandwagon unique and rank higher than the previous two carts. For one, the Bandwagon has massive stereo speakers in the back, as well as the logo for wide smooth sounds, and I think driving a muscle car with large stereo speakers pumping to the rhythm of the music is just a really cool and innovative idea. Speaking of music, the Bandwagon also illuminates in sync with the track music, similar to the Duke. However, I think this feature fits more naturally with the Bandwagon due to the vehicle's theme of music, which I think just adds more to an already pretty good kart. I also think that the Hot Pink is a pretty good and unique color combination for this kart, as it is a rarer color and fits well with the blue windshield. Stat-wise, the Bandwagon has the same stats as the GLA, meaning it has pretty good ground speed, weight, and traction stats, but lacks in other stats, with handling, acceleration, and mini-turbo stats being horrendous, making the Bandwagon another unviable kart competitively. Like in my last entry, while the Bandwagon might have disappointing stats, it still has some really cool and unique features, like its massive stereo system, as well as illuminating in sync with the music, making it one of the signature carts from 8 Deluxe in my opinion. The Cat Cruiser is basically what the Birthday Girl was trying to be in 7, but done a lot better, which was trying to advertise to the female gamer base. For one, the Cat Cruiser is a lot more discreet, as well as the Birthday Girl is just over the top and extremely girly. The Cat Cruiser design is more practical and can go well with both male and female characters. Speaking of design, the Cat Cruiser's design is also more original and fits in the Mario series. As while the Birthday Girl is based on a laced shoe, the Cat Cruiser is based on Peach's catsuit in Super Mario 3D World. It also resembles a Volkswagen New Beetle, which I think is an interesting detail. I also like the cat tail on the back of the vehicle, as well as the pink nose and whiskers in the front, as I think it just helps transform this cart to more resemble a cat. Stat-wise, the Cat Cruiser has the same stats as the Teddy Buggy, meaning besides its slightly low ground and water speed, the rest of its stats are either average or slightly above average. However, the Cat Cruiser isn't as prevalent as the Teddy Buggy, for a reason I don't really know, but still, a very good vehicle comparatively. Overall, the Cat Cruiser does a good job of advertising to the female gamer base, while also not being so on the nose. On top of that, it also has a unique design and very good stats, making it a great vehicle overall. As the name suggests, the Sports Coupe resembles a sports car. I don't think I have to explain why this car ranks high, as it's just a really sleek and sporty looking vehicle. I really like the black and yellow color combo, as they both just complement each other really well. The Sports Coupe also has 3 exhaust pipes and a star badge in the front, which just screams that this is a luxurious car. In fact, the Sports Coupe is actually based on the Smart Roadster, which I think is a really cool detail. Stat-wise, the Sports Coupe has the same stats as the Ink Striker, meaning it only has slightly below average stats in acceleration and ground and underwater handling, with its strength being in anti-gravity sections due to its above average anti-gravity speed and handling stats. Not much more to say, the Sports Coupe is just a really sleek and sporty vehicle that has an amazing color combo and the extra exhaust pipe and badge that just screams luxury. The Circuit Special is a very cool vehicle, and one that's closest to a race car in the series. In fact, it's actually designed from Formula 1 cars, with the vehicle's 3-point front and spoiler in the back being the highlights. The Circuit Special is also based on the Sprinter from Mario Kart Wii, which I think is another really cool detail. The Circuit Special also has 4 solid color combinations, with my favorite being blue. Stat-wise, the Circuit Special is not very good. While it does have a pretty good ground speed stat, as well as decent rate, the rest of its speed stats are average at best, and has horrible acceleration, handling, traction, and mini-turbo stats. Overall, while the Circuit Special might not be a kart you want to pick often, it still has an amazing design that resembles real-life racing vehicles. Usually in my Mario Kart Vehicle rankings, there's usually one vehicle that I say is intimidating, from the Flame Rider in Mario Kart Wii to the Bruiser in 7. However, the Bone Rattler is easily the most intimidating and badass vehicle in the Mario Kart series, and it's not really close. I mean, what more do I have to say about this vehicle? The red eyes are just really intimidating and badass, as well as the purple seat that is covered in spikes, and the metal plating around the vehicle just looks amazing. In fact, the Bone Rattler kinda reminds me of a metal armored Koopa Trooper in Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door, which I think is awesome since I both love that game and Koopa Troopers. The Bone Rattler is also the second vehicle in the game to have 3 wheels, along with the Tri-Speeder, which I think just makes it that much more unique. Stat-wise, the Bone Rattler coincidentally has the same stats as the Tri-Speeder, as both have decent rate and underwater stats. However, Their other stats are either average at best or horrendous at worst, which includes acceleration and mini-turbo stats. While the Mode Rattler may be bad statistically, it still has the most intimidating and badass design in the series, easily making it one of the best vehicles in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. However, there was one that I thought was just barely better. The P-Wing, in my opinion, is the best vehicle for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The P-Wing is basically a luxury sports car, as it's really sleek and stylish. I really like how the back wheels are supposed to look like rings, as well as the very stylish blue tinted windshield and red and white color combo, which is just really sleek in my opinion. The name P-Wing is also based on the flying ability you could do in Super Mario Bros. 3. It's just like how it flashes gold when it's full. P-Wing also illuminates a gold color during the anti-gravity sections, which I think is a really cool detail. Speaking of names, the P-Wing is also the successor to the Wild Wing from Mario Kart Wii, which I kinda find funny, since the Wild Wing was my second favorite vehicle in Wii, and the P-Wing is my number 1 in 8 Deluxe. It just shows how strong this vehicle design is. Stat-wise, the P-Wing has the same stats as the second special, meaning that it has decent ground speed and rate stats, but horrible acceleration, handling, traction, and mini-turbo stats, making the P-Wing another kart that isn't great competitively. Like I said in my last few entries, while the P-Wing might lack good stats, it more than makes up for it with a very sleek and sporty design, along with a few cool gimmicks. With that reason, along with its reference to the Mario series, the P-Wing is my favorite vehicle from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So we finally reached the end of the video, as well as what is most likely the last Mario Kart Vehicle ranking video, at least for a while. As for my opinion on 8 Deluxe's vehicles, I thought they were balanced both design and stat-wise. Which is really impressive, since with 41 vehicles in the game, you'd figure that some would be pretty lackluster, or at least clones of one another, but instead, all of the vehicles in 8 Deluxe look different from one another. And with the exception of 1 or 2 vehicles, the majority of the vehicles range from okay at worst to pretty good and great at best, which is again impressive, considering the amount of vehicles in the game. As for stats, while I did point out and say that some vehicles were bad or unviable, that wasn't completely true, since if you race with a GLA or still driver online, you can still compete and get some pretty good placements, if you're skilled enough. The same also kinda goes for time trials as well. While it's true that the Teddy Buggy, Mr. Scooty, and the Betty Buggy usually dominate, there are other vehicles like the Ink Striker, Streetle, and Mach 8 that can also see success in some categories, especially on underwater and anti-gravity tracks. Besides looks and stats, 8 Deluxe also has karts based on crossovers and promotions, with 6 vehicles inspired by The Legend of Zelda, Animal Crossing, and Splatoon series, as well as 3 vehicles coming from Nintendo's partnership with Mercedes-Benz, making for a very unique and interesting timeline not only for the Mario Kart series, but also Nintendo as a whole. So in conclusion, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's vehicles are very good overall, with the majority of the karts being unique design-wise, as well as fairly balanced stat-wise, with the bonus of also having crossover and promotional appeal to hype fans up even more. Usually, this is where we're in the video and start playing the credits. However, with this potentially being my last Mario Kart ranking video, at least in the near future, I think it's fitting if we look at the vehicles I ranked from DS to 8 Deluxe, and rank each game's selection from worst to best. I'll also talk about something else that was revealed very recently after the rankings. So with that being said, let's begin. In 4th place, and having the worst kart selection in my opinion, we have Mario Kart 7. Don't get me wrong, there are also very good karts in this game, like the Cloud 9 and Koopa Clown. However, with half of the vehicle selection being mediocre, as 4 vehicles are just straight up standard kart clones, I just can't put 7 above the other games. In 3rd place, we have Mario Kart DS. Just like in 7, you have bad karts like the Brute, as well as clones like the Light Tripper and Light Dancer. However, I think there should be some lenience, since it was the first Mario Kart game to introduce selectable karts. Also, I think the good easily outweighs the bad, as there's a lot of very cool and innovative karts like Rob's Vehicles, the Poltergust 4000, Rambi Rider, Gold Mantis, and of course, the introduction of the now iconic B-Dasher. So in my opinion, Mario Kart DS is sort of the introduction to kart selection, which plays a big role in how Mario Kart is played today, and I think it deserves its flowers for that. Second and first place was really hard to choose, since they're both very good. However, by a very slim margin, I chose Mario Kart Wii for second place. Like I said in that video, at worst, the vehicles are okay, but at the top are some of the best vehicles in the series. From the fun vehicles like the Dolphin Dasher and Cheap Charger, to the more stylish karts like the Wild Wing and Honeycoop. That's of course not including the Flame Runner, which is, and will still likely be, the most dominant vehicle that has ever been seen in the series. I could go on all day about the vehicles in Mario Kart Wii, but to keep things short, the majority of them are very good. Finally, as you could have probably guessed, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has the best vehicle selection in my opinion. While I will say I probably like the bikes better in Wii, not only for having more unique designs, but also having more unique controls like wheeling. However, with that being said, I think 8 Deluxe offers more balance, since you can have success with a variety of vehicles, besides just the Mach Bike and Flame Rider in Wii. 8 Deluxe also has many unique vehicles as well, thanks to crossovers. So while Mario Kart Wii might have slightly better vehicle designs and fun game mechanics, 8 Deluxe's vehicles have more balance, and it's easier to be successful with multiple vehicles, which I think pushes 8 Deluxe as number 1 for me. Again, number 2 and number 1 are extremely close to each other, in my opinion could change on a daily basis, so if you think Wii vehicles should be number 1, I wouldn't really disagree with that opinion too much. Anyway, now that we ranked all the vehicle selections in each game from worst to best, there's something that came up recently that I wanted to talk about, and that is the recent switch to Direct. More specifically, the reveal of a new system's signature game, Mario Kart World. Finally, after a decade of Mario Kart 8 and 8 Deluxe, we finally get to experience the evolution of the series, being Mario Kart World. For now, I'll just talk about what was shown in the Direct, as well as the Treehouse gameplay, since I haven't really played the game yet, and giving a review of the game now would be like me giving a review for Shrek 5, so I'll leave that for a future video. Also, I'm not going to mention the pricing controversy of Mario Kart World here, since that is an entirely different video on its own, so I'll probably talk more about that when I do my official review of the game. So with that being said, let's begin. The first thing you'll probably notice when looking at the game is the different character models and animations, as the characters in World appear to be more cartoony and expressive than in 8 Deluxe. You can see this by the characters dancing on the select screen, as well as the multiple expressions seen when doing tricks and getting speed boosts. Which makes sense, as 8 Deluxe's models were inspired from the new Super Mario Bros. Series, whereas World's is based on the more cartoony and whimsical Super Mario Bros. Wonder. In my opinion, I think this is a positive, as people were kinda getting tired of the new Super Mario Bros. Era in the Mario series. So not only does this mark a major change for the Mario series, but it's also a new era for Nintendo as a whole. The other major detail is the game's main gimmick, which is being an open world Mario Kart game. Usually when you play Mario Kart, you usually select a cup and race on the 4 tracks in that cup. However, in Mario Kart World, the whole map is one interconnected world, and when you select a cup, you race in a section of that world, which also includes racing to the next track. You also have free roam mode, which allows you to go anywhere in the game. To be honest, I'm kinda conflicted about this change. On one hand, I think free roam mode will be really fun and cool, as you explore the vast new world and potentially find cool Easter eggs. However, I don't know if I like the idea of racing to the next track in Grand Prix mode, as while there are obstacles that try to stop you, most of the race is just one big straight line. It feels like you missed 2 laps for the majority of the tracks, but again, I'll have to play the game to get a final opinion. There are also some new minor mechanics added in as well, like grinding on the rails and racing on the walls, which I think are really cool additions to the series. It will probably be used heavily in competitive play and time trials. Gliding and underwater racing have also been eliminated as well, and are replaced by jet skiing and airplane mode, which in my opinion is definitely a positive, as jet skiing just feels faster and more dynamic than underwater racing, since underwater racing is basically the same as ground racing, but slower. As for airplane mode, it just feels like you have more control of the vehicle and stay in the air longer as well compared to the glider, which is definitely a plus. Speaking of gliders, kart customization is also removed from the game, which I also think is a positive. As while kart customization was cool, it did lead to some goofy ass looking combinations, as well as some parts being overpowered, like the roller tires in 8 Deluxe, so maybe it'll help make the game more balanced. Finally, I want to take a quick look at the characters in Mario Kart World, which by far surpasses 8 Deluxe's cast, and is the largest character selection in the series. Of course you have the typical characters like Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, Yoshi, and so on and so forth. There's also new costumes for them, which I think is an amazing detail, and one of the good things that came out of Tour. Speaking of Tour, there's also characters that are making their console debut from Tour, like Hammerbro, Nabbit, Chargin' Chuck, and Monty Mole. However, the new characters are easily some of the craziest selections in the series' history. I won't name them all, but my favorites are easily Pianta, Spike, the Penguin, a Catacrack, which hasn't made an appearance in a Mario game in over a decade, and to top it all off, the friggin' cow from Moo Moo Meadows. Like, do I even need to explain why this is an awesome inclusion? However, you do have some picks that are just unnecessary or weird, like Fishbone, Peepa, and Cheep Cheep. There are also noticeable mentions like Diddy Kong, Funky Kong, Kamek, the Koopalings, and the crossover characters in 8 Deluxe. However, I think the crossover and promotional phase of Mario Kart is over, as it was done during a time when Nintendo was struggling. Plus some characters are getting their own racing game, like Kirby's revived Kirby Air Riders. Plus, there will probably be some DLC for new characters in the upcoming years, so I'll refrain from having a final opinion until then. Overall, while there are a few things I'm concerned about, my first impression of Mario Kart World is pretty positive, as the new looks, gimmicks, and characters offer a fun and innovative experience. I can't wait to play and make a more in-depth review of the game in the near future. Anyway, if you made it to the end of the video, I just want to thank you for sitting through the whole thing, as there was a lot of information to digest as we close a chapter in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and open a new one in Mario Kart World. If you liked the video, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like or a comment about future video ideas. Also, if you would like to see more content like this, consider checking out the rest of my Mario Kart Vehicle ranking series, or other videos on my channel, and subscribe if you want to see future videos. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say, so until next time, Koopa out.